Well, good morning. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm representing EMBARQ. EMBARQ is the transportation division of WRI. WRI is the World Resources Institute based in Washington. And we have centers in different countries, like in India, Mexico, Peru, Turkey, and now also in China. And as we talked yesterday with some people, realities are really different. Professor Seifer already mentioned we cannot just simply transfer solutions from one country to the other. So my presentation will be focused in Brazil, and to tell you a bit what's going on there, a sort of overview of urban mobility in Brazil. Just some rough figures to start, and by the way, I mean, I'm going to present you many pictures. If you're interested in academic papers and reports on whatever I'm going to talk here, please come to me later on, and I'll be happy to facilitate that for you. Now, we're talking of a country with a population of 190 million, which is, in fact, 84% urban, which is very contrasting with countries like China and India, where we are also working, that has a sort of urban rate that we had in the 1930s in Brazil. Now, most unfortunately, we rank very sort of low. Amazing, 84 is the same number, but that's not a very nice position to be in the Human Development Index. And we have about 200 cars and SUVs per 1,000 people in Brazil. Now, not only Human Development Index, but if you look at the Gini Index, and I think that's one of the most important things to look and to talk when we're talking about Brazil, you can see that we are not very well positioned there also. So we are a very unequal country, and that's probably very important to stress now, because I would like to address and start talking about non-motorized transport, and I think the Gini Index has a lot to do with that. And for instance, this is meant to be a cycleway, recently inaugurated. And as you can see, I mean, very little signaling or whatever for being a cycleway, very little conditions for being that, and most probably won't really be operated as a cycleway. Now, this is Curitiba, some of the sidewalks. I mean, fortunately, not all over the city, but then you have the problems with sidewalks. And by the way, pedestrians are not really in our mobility programs, because sidewalks are not responsibility from the government. They are sort of made responsible for the people that live around them. And usually what we have is we do asphalt in low communities, and then you bring speed, and then you bring death also by doing that. Okay, so this is the typical sort of, and if you go to parking bicycles, surely, as you can see there, that's not a good system, and people don't use that way anyway. So we know all about this, and our work in Brazil and in other countries is to catalyze and implement sustainable solutions. So we have to get to stakeholders and work together with cities and national government to do that. Now, what's going on in Brazil, in overall terms, we are facing this congestion growth over time and space, and be it for buses, as you can see here with the bus lanes in São Paulo and Porto Alegre, and also with traffic in general terms. So you'll face that and you'll find that in every major city in Brazil, and most unfortunately, this has been the trend. We're coming from, this is public transport, and this is private transport, and as you can see, as time goes by, we are about here now. We're talking only here about motorized trips, okay? Not non-motorized trips, but only motorized, and as you can see, it will raise to 65% in the future if we don't manage to curb that, and motorcycles to that extent are very important. What can cities do? And certainly you have already addressed that, and this is very nice of FISITA that look outside the box not only for cars, but you have already in a previous event thought about and discussed certainly this, so we can disincentive the use of private cars, improve public transport, a stimulus to non-motorized transport, transit-oriented develop, as we just heard, And that's all the contributions of transport for a sustainable city. Now, what are cities doing in Brazil? And for that sake, I decided to select here a sample of 4 cities. Cities we are already, some of them working very close, and São Paulo that we are likely to work starting next year. So I'll be talking about São Paulo, which is a mega city. If we look at the metropolitan area, we're talking about 19.7 million. Rio, 11.7, Curitiba, 3.2, and Belo Horizonte, 5.4. I mean, there are plenty of other big cities in Brazil, but as I said, I cannot cover all them. Now, Curitiba is the cradle for BRT systems, and my colleagues of BRT will sort of, I'm lucky they are not here, but let's make it a very crude concept for BRT, like it's like importing the metro concepts and putting into buses, okay? We can discuss this later, but that's a very crude statement anyway, and that all started in Curitiba. In fact, the plan in Curitiba, when Curitiba was about 500,000, the plan was to introduce priority lanes for buses that were gradually developed into BRTs and to shape the city and using a sort of development that is letting buildings grow more along the corridor and densify more along the corridor. And in fact, that became reality. If you look at Curitiba now, Curitiba has that sort of shape along the corridors. And if you look at the city, you'll see that the 2 corridors here, the south and the west, they are already developed and follow the pattern. Now, if we think about the future of Curitiba, you can see that there is the green line here, which is a new corridor. In fact, this was a former roadway crossing the city. This city roadway connects São Paulo to the south of Brazil, for instance, and it was crossing the Curitiba, so they did a ring road and decided to reurbanize this sector. And in fact, it's called Green Line, not only because it's green in the map, but also because of the approach they're taking for this particular corridor. It has about 18 kilometers of extension. It's partly, half of it is already introduced. This is the former roadway. This is the way it's starting to shape. This is the future trend in terms of development. And see here is already implemented. And they are running on articulated buses that are 100% biodiesel. And they have 30 vehicles running, and they did some tests on that, and they're still operating them, I mean, for environmental sake and so on. So this is, say, a very crude overview of Curitiba. Now, Belo Horizonte. Belo Horizonte has recently introduced a plan for the horizon of 2020. And the nice thing about Belo Horizonte is that this is a plan meant to continue over different administrations. I mean, this is a problem we always face in Brazil. Whenever we change city mayors, we change policies. And Belo Horizonte has also introduced an observatory, so that should continue over time. And they have targets for increasing the modal share of public transport, for having bicycles on the roads, for reducing car accidents. And the important thing about Belo Horizonte is that it's basically a transit-oriented development plan also. This is the trend of land use growth, and these are the population shifts, and you can see where densification is occurring. And this is the idea of the plan, I mean, to change that and to really focus to where the transit already is and where the corridors are already established. Well, the TOD along one corridor, just to give you an idea, I mean, this is where a bus rapid transit corridor will be implemented, and that's what they want to do in terms of facilitating the development along this corridor. I should mention at this stage that we haven't yet in Brazil succeeded into getting money out of these developments. I don't know what the plans are also in the States or later on in Japan, but that's something that we should try to do in Brazil at least at some stage. I mean, even in Curitiba, they haven't done yet. And along that road I showed to you, I mean, the land values have sort of increased by a factor of 3, but that didn't revert to the transportation sector anyway. Plan up to 2014, and that comes a big event in Brazil that probably you're aware of, will be the FIFA World Cup. So we have 12 cities in Brazil sort of trying to do something in terms of mobility for that. And this is the plan. So the idea is to have 3 BRT corridors to structure the World Cup up to that horizon. And all these BRT corridors, they will sort of merge here in the city center. And this is part of the work we're doing there with simulation to see if that will work properly, actually. Because we are talking about very heavy BRT corridors. I didn't tell you the figures here, but corridors in Curitiba, for instance, 15,000 passengers per hour per direction. We are currently working in a corridor in Rio, which is still in the drawing board, that goes up to 60,000. I mean, that's more than many metros in the world, actually. Transmilenio has 42,000, just to give you an idea. So many of these corridors, the BRT corridors, will be double lanes. That's the only way you can achieve very high capacities, and then operated either by articulated or be-articulated buses. And the idea is to change this trend. Imagine, I mean, we have still a lot of users of public transit. We want to keep them, and we want to upgrade the conditions where they are now standing and operating. Next city is Rio, and Rio is marked by mega events. Well, it's already a mega city, but now it has an agenda of mega events. See, you have the UN conference in 2012, and then we have the Confederations Cup, and then the World Cup, and then comes the anniversary of the city, and then comes the Olympic Games. Now, fact is, each of these sort of requires different approaches. Different zones in the city where different events will occur, and probably you're aware through the press what's going on in Rio when with the slums that are nearby the events that are being taken over by police at the moment. I mean, just gives you an idea of Rocinha, which is the last one that was taken last week, and there are plenty of favelas or slums to be taken in Brazil and have to be reorganized. This gives you an idea of the city center of Rio. Some corridors have something like 900 buses per hour all coming to the city center, and I mean, it's natural that this has to be rationalized, right? So BRT is a need in Brazil for this sort of thing. So Rio is investing heavily on that. We're talking about 250, about 200 more corridors of BRTs. So be it simpler systems or more sophisticated systems, they are all on the way. And priority network, as you can see, very little still in 2011, but should be a major network by 2015. And Rio is geared more towards the Olympic Games than the World Cup anyway. Now, this gives you an idea of the slums in Rio. We're talking about 20% of the population. In Brazil, in general terms, is 26% of the population. We are currently now working with these slums redevelopment to introduce sustainable urban transport there. And I'll be very happy if you guys could sort of have ideas and come to me with ideas how to solve the 2.2 meter wide roads we have in these environments where you cannot even fit a car inside. So car cannot come to this sort of, and there are, we even want to put bicycles there, so we have to be very creative to do that, okay? São Paulo is the last one, is the mega city. São Paulo, even being a mega city, still has a lot of opportunities for urban renovation. This is Morumbi, the most expensive neighborhood in São Paulo, and this is a slum just nearby. There are many projects of urban renovation in São Paulo, but most unfortunately, very little going on in that terms. There is a plan for 2025 on introducing many corridors and many centralities, and we are talking about a huge city anyway. Most striking that São Paulo is one of the cities that informs the queues. I think is one of the few cities I know that. And although there is a pick and plate system going on in São Paulo, so you have some days you cannot run your cars, and I've heard already from the car industry that the car industry couldn't have devised such a good scheme for selling cars, because naturally people that could bought other cars. I mean, so we have another car. In fact, there are few cities in the world that have these schemes: Bogota, Mexico City, São Paulo, and Santiago, according to depending on the environmental conditions, right? So certainly congestion charging is much more interesting than this. Can metro save São Paulo? São Paulo is heavily investing in metros. There is very little metros in São Paulo, about 70 kilometers up to now, and there is an idea of creating an essential metro network, although metros are very expensive to implement. And there is a climate law in São Paulo just implemented. It says progressive restriction of private cars to the city center, but excluding the adoption of congestion charging, which to me seems very difficult to achieve. So but politically, talking about congestion charging in Brazil is really difficult. And also sulfur diesel, low sulfur diesel after 2012, and all buses running on non-fossil fuels by 2018. That's already also a big challenge. We have to see how São Paulo will do that. So there's a lot to do there. The risk: clean fuels, clean vehicles, the before situation, the after situation will have clean congestions. I mean, that's my view on it, which is not sustainable, okay? This is not sustainable transport. Motorcycles, just before I finish, just a couple of slides. Before the new traffic code, motorcycles were small numbers in the cities. After the traffic code allowed motorcycles to run between vehicles. I mean, so you can see the big advantage. Everything stops, but motorcycles never stop. So if you look at the sales, motorcycles have increased 461% over the period 97-2007, much more than cars. If you look at the death, this is when the code started. I mean, people thought of, oh, now I'll be fine, now I'll be in jail or whatever, and then they realized that will not happen. Increase again, and then motorcycles are running, and last year figure is 40,000. So we keep increasing the death in transit. Motorcycles kill 10,000 per year, be it the motorcycle drivers or users or people involved in that, which is about 1/4 of all the deaths in Brazil. And motorcycles are used in delivery. Some cities do operate moto taxis, although they are illegal. And we have, most unfortunately, plenty of former bus commuters now riding motorcycles, and I think our biggest challenge will be to attract them back to transit systems. I mean, that's another thing, if you have any good idea about that. But that's a trend we also finding in other developing nations. Well, thank you very much.